Alex Chemmer over here at Movements for Life. Today's restoration is going to take us to the posterior hip. Posterior hip is a common area of complaint for many clients. You may have heard about it, specifically the piriformis as it relates to sciatica. So if you've ever had any electric lightning feeling going down the leg, you probably are aware of your posterior hip, some of the other tissues in there. So underneath the glute, there's a whole fan or network of muscles that essentially run from your femur and attach to the base of your lower back, also called your sacrum. So it influences a lot of stuff going up into the back and also down to the knee. So when we look at the posterior hip and when we create load or stretch, everything should internally rotate, like with gait. So as my right leg steps forward and everything collapses in, that internal rotation is essentially what turns on the glute. So if the hip does not have the ability to internally rotate or to load, that's when we start getting all these compensatory patterns and when we start getting really, really sour in different parts of our body that really don't like it. So this is designed to be as a follow-up once you have done soft tissue work on the posterior hip. So whether you're foam rolling or using a lacrosse ball either against the wall or on the ground, you can find that in videos under soft tissue. So this is designed to be the follow-up once you roll these tissues and make them more pliable. So there's a couple different ways and tools that we use to help locally stretch the posterior hip. So the pigeon has become much more mainstream thanks to yoga. So to get into a pigeon pose, starting a push-up position and just swing one leg kind of underneath you. The amount of knee bend will determine how much torque goes into the knee. So if I get my knee as an extreme up to 90 degrees, that's going to put a lot of torque on not only my knee, also my hip. So think about comfort on the knee. What can you get into that'll allow you to start kind of squishing into that hip? So a couple things, I'll give you a couple different views here. When looking at my upper back, depending on how much mobility I have, not only through my hip that I'm stretching, my right one in this case, also my left hip flexor is being stretched depending on if my knee is on the ground or not. So depending on what we're doing and what client we're stretching and their restrictions will determine whether or not this knee is on the ground or not. But in looking at the upper body, I like to maintain a little bit more of a taller posture here so that I essentially arch my lower back and I start gapping the tissues more in that posterior hip rather than allowing my whole upper body to come all the way down to the ground, which while impressive from a mobility standpoint that I could get the chest to the floor, I'm just starting to introduce more and more spinal motions. Plus here, my pelvis is in a position of being in a posterior tilt where I would prefer to actually maintain an anterior tilt here to actually get more of an arch. So that's from the side view. All right. From the front view, when the leg is underneath me, keeping the knee and hip in line, I actually want to squish into this hip a little bit. So as I get into a nice pigeon stretch, I want to keep nice alignment here so my hip actually isn't moving away in my direction here. My right hip will be moving to the left. I want to actually allow my hip to kind of absorb my body weight as I fall into it. And now from here, since this is a local active stretch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rocking type pattern by using my back heel. So I do need to keep my knee off the ground, and what's happening is I'm keeping my upper body nice and tall. I'm anterior tilted, so I have a nice arch in my low back as I rock forwards and backwards. All right, I could also change planes and I can move my pelvis right to left. So this is going to create more adduction at the hips. So think of what happens to all these tissues to the right as my pelvis moves to the right. All right, so a couple different variations. I have a slider here next to me. Sliders work well. Both of those variations involve me driving my pelvis. I can also move and drive with my hand by using a slider. So if I want to go really transverse plane heavy and really twisty, I can take my opposite hand, so my left hand when my right leg is down, and really start to drive with my hand, which is going to twist my upper body, and it's going to create more and more hip internal rotation, which is going to start putting more and more load and stretch on those tissues. If you don't have a slider, you can totally do it with the hand. Totally works. All right, and you can play around. You can reach into some different directions. I can reach sagittal plane by reaching in front, or I can reach left hand to the left, and then the hip counters by also shifting to the left. So a lot of different variations to get into a kind of a modified pigeon stretch, depending on who the client is, what their restrictions are, what we're trying to do with them. But if the goal is just to increase more and more tissue length, specifically through the posterior hip, all these variations in some capacity will be able to do that. Just got to fit the right one for the right client or for yourself, and then take it from there. So enjoy this one. This is definitely a love-hate. The pigeon has definitely made its way around over the years. So if some of these are new to you, give them a whirl, see how they go. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. Thanks so much.